In today's episode, we're covering 6 of the most horrific wedding deaths ever recorded. From a planned helicopter-style flyover, surprising wedding guests from above, to a packed reception floor that suddenly gave way in the most shocking way possible. It was August 14, 2017, in a rural lakeside property outside Helena, Montana, where a late afternoon wedding was nearing its final transition from ceremony to reception. Rows of white chairs still faced the temporary wooden arch near the shoreline, while guests moved toward the tented dining area set back from the water. Music equipment had been tested, drinks were being poured, and the atmosphere reflected the relaxed timing of a summer outdoor event. The bride, 29-year-old Lauren Pierce, had planned a dramatic moment to mark the end of the ceremony. A close family friend, a recreational pilot, had offered to fly a small ultralight aircraft over the property at low altitude and release a fabric banner bearing the couple's initials. The aircraft was a single-seat microlight, lightweight and sensitive to wind changes, typically flown at low speeds and short ranges. The plan had not been formally coordinated with aviation authorities, and the flight was treated as an informal addition rather than a regulated display. Guests were told to remain near the ceremony area as the flyover occurred. Lauren stood near the aisle with her husband and several members of the wedding party, facing the lake. The aircraft was heard before it was seen, its engine sound growing louder as it approached from the south, descending lower than some guests expected. Several people raised phones to record as the microlight aligned itself with the open stretch of land beside the ceremony space. As the aircraft passed overhead, the banner failed to release cleanly. The pilot adjusted altitude and throttle, attempting to correct the approach and maintain control while clearing the rigging. Witnesses later described the aircraft wobbling as it encountered uneven air currents rising off the water and nearby trees. The microlight dipped lower during the correction, its left wing dropping briefly before the pilot recovered partial control. The aircraft clipped the top of a decorative lighting pole installed near the aisle. The impact destabilized the frame, causing the microlight to yaw sharply and lose lift. It descended rapidly into the ceremony area, striking the ground near the front rows of seating. Debris scattered outward on impact as the aircraft's lightweight structure collapsed. Lauren was struck during the crash and sustained severe blunt force injuries. The impact occurred within seconds, leaving no time for guests to move clear of the area. The aircraft came to rest several yards from where she had been standing, its engine no longer running. Dust and debris briefly obscured visibility as guests rushed away from the wreckage. Emergency services were contacted immediately, but Lauren was pronounced dead at the scene from injuries incompatible with survival. Several guests suffered minor injuries while attempting to move clear, and the pilot survived with serious fractures and internal injuries. The reception was never held. The property was secured as investigators documented the wreckage and surrounding area. Later reviews determined the flight had not been properly planned for the conditions or proximity to people, and the aircraft was not suitable for low-altitude maneuvering over a crowded space. Authorities cited improper judgment and lack of safety oversight as contributing factors. The wedding ended where it had begun, with the ceremony site sealed off, the decorations left standing, and the event permanently defined by a moment intended as celebration. It was April 28, 2021, in Dayton, Ohio, where a wedding reception was coming to an end at a waterfront venue in Montgomery County. The property sat along a regional river and was commonly used for weddings and private events, offering both indoor and outdoor spaces for full-day celebrations. As the evening progressed, guests moved between the reception hall, the bar area, and the exterior walkways, while music continued inside. John Reed, 68, was the groom's father and had lived in Dayton most of his life. A retired machinist, he was known within his family for his steady routines and quiet presence. During the reception, John spent much of the evening seated near the edge of the room, speaking with relatives and occasionally stepping outside to get fresh air. He had declined alcohol and planned to return to his nearby hotel once the reception began winding down. The venue had limited on-site parking. To manage guest movement, Staff routinely relied on golf carts to transport people between the venue, overflow parking areas, and nearby hotels roughly a mile away. The practice was common during weddings held there, and had been used earlier that evening without incident. Several carts operated intermittently as guests departed in small groups. The venue bordered a two-lane county road with a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. The road remained open to public traffic throughout the event. No temporary barriers, warning signs, or traffic controls were installed to separate golf carts from passing vehicles. Street lighting was sparse beyond nearby intersections, leaving long stretches of roadway dark after sunset. Venue security remained focused on activities inside the reception hall rather than traffic conditions outside. Shortly before midnight, John prepared to leave. He entered a golf cart driven by another guest, intending to return to his hotel. The cart was a standard recreational model designed for use on private property. It was open-sided and unenclosed, with no seatbelts, lighting upgrades, or protective structure. No escort vehicle accompanied the cart as it exited the venue and merged onto the county road. The cart traveled at low speed along the roadway, sharing the lane with regular vehicle traffic. Several minutes after departure, a passenger vehicle approached from behind. The driver, another wedding guest, was traveling well above the posted speed limit. Security footage later showed no braking or evasive movement before impact. The vehicle struck the rear of the golf cart at high speed. The cart was crushed and pushed forward, ejecting its occupants onto the roadway and into a shallow drainage area beside the road. The collision occurred so quickly that there was no opportunity for avoidance. Debris from the cart scattered across the pavement as the vehicle came to rest further down the road. Emergency calls were placed immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found John Reed unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at the scene from severe traumatic injuries sustained during the impact. Other occupants of the cart were transported to local hospitals with serious but non-fatal injuries. Law enforcement secured the roadway and began an investigation. Subsequent findings identified excessive speed, impaired driving, inadequate lighting, and the absence of physical separation between golf carts and vehicle traffic as contributing factors. The wedding ended not with celebration, but with the venue closed off, the road blocked by emergency vehicles, and the groom's father becoming the sole fatality of a night shaped by routine decisions that carried unrecognized risk. It was May 1st, 2018 in Bayfield, Wisconsin, where evening light reflected off Lake Superior as guests gathered inside a third-floor reception hall overlooking the water, the wedding running on schedule and the reception expected to unfold without interruption as people moved between tables, the bar, and the open dance floor. Rachel Klein was 26 and lived in Ann Arbor, where she worked as a project coordinator, accustomed to managing schedules and capacity limits. David Morrison, 28, grew up in Traverse City and was familiar with the building's earlier use before its conversion into an event venue. Their decision to hold the reception there was based on location and availability, with the assumption that the space had been properly approved for large gatherings. The building had been converted into an event venue in the late 1990s. During that renovation, several interior support columns were removed to create a wide, uninterrupted floor suitable for receptions. The space met the standards in place at the time, but later reviews found it was not designed to handle the concentrated loads created by dense, synchronized movement. The venue listed a maximum occupancy, and on the night of the wedding, the number of guests inside the hall exceeded that limit. Rachel and David moved toward the center of the hall as the band prepared to start the next set. The open floor had been cleared of tables, leaving a wide space for dancing. Amplifiers and speakers were positioned a short distance ahead of them, their weight resting over the same section of flooring where guests began to gather. As music resumed, the couple joined a growing group of dancers nearby, their movement pulling others inward around them. With each song, the space tightened. The floor beneath their feet flexed slightly during heavier steps, a brief bounce that passed quickly and drew little attention. Neither Rachel nor David reacted. The building had hosted weddings before, and nothing about the room suggested immediate danger. They remained near the center as the crowd thickened around them. The failure came without warning. The floor beneath Rachel and David dropped suddenly. The section they stood on collapsed downward, opening beneath them as the structure gave way. They fell with the flooring as it broke apart, dropping approximately 12 feet into the room below. Tables, lighting fixtures, and sound equipment followed, striking the collapsing surface as it disintegrated. Rachel was hit by falling structural material during the initial collapse. The impact drove her downward amid debris, causing severe blunt force and crushing injuries. David fell with her and struck the lower level, sustaining multiple fractures as debris continued to fall around him. Dust filled the space, cutting visibility to near zero, as the remaining floor shifted briefly before stabilizing. The entire sequence lasted only seconds. Rachel died at the scene from injuries incompatible with survival. 2 other guests were also killed in the collapse. David was pulled from the debris alive and transported to the hospital with multiple fractures and internal injuries. The failure occurred directly beneath the couple, centered on the section of floor where they had been standing. Emergency crews arrived within several minutes and secured the building as victims were triaged outside. Structural engineers later ruled the remaining floors unsafe for occupancy. Investigators determined the collapse was caused by renovation-altered load paths, combined with overcrowding and concentrated movement on the dance floor. The venue's permit was revoked, civil lawsuits followed, and the building was later condemned and demolished. Authorities cited the incident as a preventable structural failure and revised inspection standards for converted event spaces. It was November 28, 2015, in Biloxi, Mississippi, where a wedding reception was underway inside a supper club located in a coastal entertainment district near the waterfront. The building sat among restaurants and nightlife venues and had been used for private events and banquets for years. Inside, multiple dining rooms were connected by narrow corridors designed more for atmosphere than crowd movement. As evening settled in, guests filled the interior, moving between tables, buffet stations, and the live music area. The groom, 26-year-old Robert Carmichael, grew up in Gulfport and worked in marine equipment maintenance along the coast. Friends described him as practical and detail-oriented, someone who preferred dependable choices over showmanship. The venue had been selected for its familiarity and availability, with the expectation that staff were accustomed to handling large gatherings safely. Robert spent much of the early reception greeting relatives and helping older family members find seats near the main dining area. The reception drew a group of guests who were largely unfamiliar with the building's layout and relied on visible pathways and staff guidance to move through the space. Earlier in the afternoon, venue staff had adjusted the floor plan to accommodate the gathering. Extra tables and chairs were brought in from storage, narrowing some walkways. Decorative drapes, floral displays, and string lighting were installed throughout the dining rooms, and additional electrical equipment was added to support the band and buffet warmers. As the reception continued, Robert moved between tables near the main dining area, checking on relatives and speaking briefly with guests as food service wrapped up. Music played at moderate volume, and the atmosphere remained calm. Nothing in the room suggested an emergency. The first sign of trouble appeared above him. Heat built up within the ceiling space over the dining area, where improperly spliced wiring had been strained by the additional electrical load. Insulation ignited out of sight, allowing the fire to spread through concealed voids before flames were visible. A faint burning smell reached the room. Robert and others nearby assumed it came from kitchen equipment or stage lighting. Within minutes, smoke began drifting into the corridors connected to the dining area. Robert noticed visibility changing along the hallway leading away from the room. When interior lights failed shortly afterward, sections of the venue dropped into partial darkness. Guests hesitated, uncertain which direction led outside. As people turned toward the main entrance, movement slowed. Added furniture and decorations narrowed the available paths. Robert remained near the dining area, assisting guests who were unsure where to go, and then moved toward what he believed was a secondary exit, through one of the connecting corridors. Smoke thickened rapidly in the hallway. Ventilation was limited, and the space filled faster than the adjoining rooms. Robert collapsed there after being overcome by smoke and carbon monoxide. Other guests nearby were forced to retreat as conditions deteriorated. Firefighters arrived shortly afterward and began evacuating remaining occupants while navigating the building's maze-like interior. Robert was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide exposure. Several guests were hospitalized with respiratory injuries and minor burns, but no other fatalities occurred. The reception was never resumed and the building was closed as investigators examined the fire's origin and interior modifications. Later findings pointed to electrical deficiencies and layout changes that reduced safe egress under emergency conditions. The wedding ended not with celebration, but with the venue sealed off, decorations left behind, and the groom's death defining an evening that had been expected to mark the beginning of a new life. It was June 25th, 2017, when a wedding reception departed from a marina along a commercial river channel outside a mid-sized lakeside city in the Great Lakes region. The event was held aboard a chartered passenger vessel scheduled for a sunset cruise, allowing guests to attend the reception while traveling along the shoreline. Similar celebrations had been hosted on the water before, and the setup was viewed as a practical way to combine scenery, transportation, and reception space. Mark Torres was 32 years old and lived locally, where he worked as an inventory coordinator at a regional distribution warehouse. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, he had struggled to adjust his work schedule to attend. Staffing shortages and delayed shipments kept him working long shifts, but he eventually secured the evening off. He attended the reception with his younger brother, Carlos, and planned to return home later that night after spending time with extended family. The wedding belonged to a cousin who had chosen the vessel based on a recommendation from friends who had attended similar cruises in the area. Those prior events had gone smoothly, and the boat was familiar to local operators. The reception was intended to be relaxed, with guests free to move between the enclosed lower cabin and the open upper deck as the vessel traveled. More guests boarded the vessel than it had originally been configured to carry. Mark noticed the upper deck filling quickly as people arrived, but boarding continued without pause. No safety briefing was given before departure, and life jackets remained stowed out of sight. Crew members focused on departure timing and guest comfort, moving between tables and the bar area as the lines were cast off. At first, the ride felt smooth. Mark stood near the rail with his brother and several relatives as the vessel moved through the protected channel. Decorative lighting reflected off the water, music played behind them, and drinks were passed hand to hand. Nothing about the motion suggested a problem as the shoreline slowly drifted away. As the vessel entered more exposed water, Mark felt a subtle change beneath his feet. Guests crossed between the upper and lower decks, while others remained gathered along the same side where he was standing, leaning outward to watch the sunset and take photographs. The deck shifted slightly as people repositioned, then settled again. Wakes from passing commercial traffic reached the vessel soon after. Each wave produced a longer roll than the last. Mark felt the deck tilt toward the rail, and then hesitate before returning upright. After several cycles, it no longer leveled completely. No announcements were made, and the reception continued as if nothing had changed. The list increased suddenly. Mark felt the deck angle steepen beneath him, forcing guests to grab the railing for balance. From below, water began entering the lower cabin through openings near the waterline. The vessel leaned further as the crew attempted to respond, but the shift in weight progressed faster than any correction. Within minutes, the boat rolled onto its side and capsized. Mark was thrown into the water amid debris and overturned sections of the hull. In the confusion, he was separated from his brother as passengers surfaced around him, some clinging to floating objects while others struggled to orient themselves. Rescue efforts began quickly as nearby boaters and marina staff reached the scene and emergency services were dispatched. Mark Torres did not survive. He was recovered from the water and pronounced dead due to drowning, after being unable to escape the vessel's sudden rollover. His brother was rescued and transported for medical care. Several other guests were treated for hypothermia and near-drowning injuries. Later reviews identified excessive passenger loading, uneven weight distribution, and the absence of active safety oversight as contributing factors. The reception ended with the vessel overturned and the celebration permanently defined by a sequence of decisions that turned a familiar setting into a fatal environment. It was August 25, 2015, in Fresno, California, where a wedding ceremony and reception were held inside an indoor event hall commonly used for private celebrations and community gatherings. The space had hosted birthdays, reunions, and weddings for years, and nothing about the venue itself suggested unusual risk. Guests arrived throughout the afternoon, filling the hall as final preparations were made for dinner service. Melissa Grant was 32 years old and lived in Modesto, where she worked as an administrative assistant for a property management company. She was the bride's chief bridesmaid and had been closely involved in the wedding planning. Throughout the day, Melissa helped coordinate schedules, assisted guests with seating, and handled small problems as they arose. Friends described her as organized and reliable, someone who stayed active during events rather than sitting for long stretches. The couple chose off-site catering instead of using an in-house kitchen. The decision was personal rather than commercial. The head cook was a close friend of the bride who had prepared food for family gatherings and small events in the past. Based on that familiarity, the couple trusted her to manage the food without formal oversight. Food preparation began earlier that morning at a rented commercial kitchen located outside the city. The catering operation had recently experienced refrigeration issues, but continued operating using temporary solutions. No refrigerated vehicles were available for transport. Instead, food was loaded into standard cargo vans without cooling systems. That afternoon, temperatures in the region climbed into the high 90s. No temperature logs were recorded during transport, and food containers were not actively cooled. After arriving at the venue, dishes were placed on buffet tables and in chafing trays. Hot foods were warmed with gel fuel, while cold dishes were left uncovered and unrefrigerated. The ceremony ran behind schedule, delaying dinner service. As a result, prepared food remained out for several hours. Items containing poultry, seafood, and mayonnaise sat within the temperature danger zone for extended periods. Guests served themselves throughout the evening as speeches and formal activities continued. Melissa remained on her feet, moving between tables and checking on guests. She ate small portions while working, sampling several dishes as the night went on. By late evening, guests began complaining of nausea and stomach pain. Some left early, while others became ill after returning home. Local hospitals started receiving patients overnight and into the following day. Dozens of guests were treated for gastrointestinal illness. Most recovered with supportive care. Melissa's condition worsened. Medical records later showed she had a pre-existing gastrointestinal condition that increased her vulnerability to severe infection. Despite treatment, she developed sepsis and died 2 days later from septic shock caused by salmonella infection. Public health officials investigated the outbreak and collected remaining food samples. Testing identified salmonella enteritis in multiple dishes, consistent with prolonged exposure to unsafe temperatures during transport and service. Inspectors cited numerous violations related to food handling, storage, and temperature control. Regulatory action followed, and civil claims were filed by affected families. The wedding ended not with celebration, but with one guest's death traced back to routine decisions that allowed unsafe food practices to go unnoticed until it was too late. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this video? Click more.